And you had mentioned a couple of things when you reached out to me. The first one I want to ask you about was they had rules on visual intercourse.
Yeah, that got me 50 demerits.
What is that?
So, visual intercourse is when you stare in the eyes of the opposite sex, because obviously there was no homosexuality happening, right?
Right.
But when you stare in the eyes of an opposite sex for too long, which too long was anything that a faculty or staff member deemed lustful.
100% of the proceeds gained from this monetized episode will be donated to sciencesaves.org. Thanks for listening. Katie Landry, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Growing Up Fundie.
Yes.
For anybody listening, Katie and I met years ago back in Chicago at a storytelling event called Truth or Lie. Still love that show. I actually reached out to the producers to see if they wanted a Nashville version. So still working on that. I would love to bring it to Nashville. And you reached out to me through my Google form when I was looking for guests for the show. And so just so anybody listening knows, I actually look at that. I do look at those submissions and I reach out to everybody. And I was so excited to hear from you because I've been seeing your updates over the years. And I remember that day that we met at Truth or Lie. And I was so curious to hear your story. So if you don't mind, just give us a little background on who you are and what you're up to and what we're going to talk about today.
All right. Well, my name is Katie Landry. I am currently living in St. Thomas, which is a U.S. Virgin Island. So before y'all Google this, no, you don't need a passport to come here. It is a U.S. territory.
That's amazing.
All right. And it's beautiful. I work for Marriott. I work in their sales department. So that's what took me to Chicago years ago when I met you, Sydney. Like I travel a lot for work and live in different really cool places. But I didn't grow up that way. I grew up, my mom was from Louisville, Kentucky. My dad was from Louisiana. And when I was 7, they had a midlife crisis and they joined the Amish.
Wow.
So I call it a midlife crisis. My brother calls it 10 years hard labor because it is a lot of work.
Yes.
They left 10 years later. So they left when I was 17. And they didn't go too far. They went into a fundamentalist church, and that is where my Fundie story, I guess, starts.
Yeah. And do you know like what appealed to them about the Amish lifestyle in the beginning?
Yeah, like parents are who they are.
Right.
And what has taken me a lot of therapy
Yep.
and a lot of searching to realize is our parents, they come with their own traumas and they come with their own origin story and their own shit. And then they do the very best they can, you know?
Right.
So as I've gotten older and gone through therapy and taken a hard look at the background of my parents, my mom's parents were alcoholics and very dysfunctional. They set her down once a year and said, "We're getting divorced. Who do you want to live with?" And
wow.
very traumatic.
Yeah.
And my dad's side of the family, very large, very Catholic, but also a broken home and also a lot of alcoholism. And then they met each other. They were both in the Navy and not in the Navy by choice. It was like back in the 70s where the judge was like, you can go to jail or you can go to the Navy. Like they chose Navy. So that's how they met each other. They met each other and they both came from these broken homes. And I think that as they started having a family themselves, they knew they did not want to continue that generation of broken home. They didn't want to continue the several generations of alcoholism. And they just had no clue how. So they literally, I will never forget this. It was on a Wednesday. Mom tucked the kids. We put us in an Oldsmobile station wagon and we drove to a library. And somewhere the librarian directed her to a book about plain people, Amish and Mennonites. And she left the library with that book on a Wednesday afternoon. And on Sunday, we were in our first Amish church.
Wow.
So I think it
Wow.
was about, as I look back to that, and I've gotten to know them better and their origin stories. I think it was about trying to find who does family well. How can we make this work? How can we do this? And who can give us the tools? And they thought that the plain people, Amish and Mennonites, had those tools.
Yeah. And I wonder also if, especially for people who suffered so much like trauma and stress, I wonder if the idea of like a very simple lifestyle just sounds like a relax, like for the first time ever, they can just kind of relax and just enjoy the present as opposed to being stressed out about what's coming, what happened. It seems very like a very present lifestyle, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Um, and something interesting I've found talking to people on this podcast is that it's very, very rare. Oh, like, in fact, I can't even think of a single example where parents put their kids in a situation like that other than trying their best to do better. Even the ones that ended up accidentally like being abusive or taking it too far or whatever, in every scenario where the parents like pick up their kids and move them to some extreme religious, whether it's a cult, whether it's a lifestyle, whether it's something just totally different, it always starts from a place of we just want to try better. Whether or not it stays there, it never stays there, right? It always goes off the deep end. But that's the interesting part, and that's I think it's, great that you can recognize that about them in the
Yeah.
beginning. Absolutely, and so then they leave the Amish Mennonite lifestyle, and what
Yeah.
happens next?
So they left when I was 17 and they started going to a Bible church. And for those of you who are not familiar, a Bible church is a fundamentalist type of Baptist, I think. I don't know
Yeah,
how to.
yeah,
It's like Baptist and then more.
right.
And like we didn't wear pants. We definitely did not wear jeans. Um, it was, again, in my opinion, not that far from the Amish and Mennonite. It just wasn't that far of a stretch. Um, and in that particular church, everybody, and I mean everybody, attended a university called Bob Jones University. So the Mennonites and Amish, they stopped school at 8th grade, right?
Wow.
And so we had stopped school at 8th grade. And if you're a boy, you learn a trade. And if you're a girl, you start preparing to be a wife and a mom. So I had a hope chest and I had bought things and made quilts and sewn things for my hope chest for when I would be married. And there was no concept of college or a life outside of, that.
Yeah.
So now I'm 17. We're not Amish or Mennonite anymore. And now the people are talking to me about what are you going to study when you go to Bob Jones University? And I don't even have like a GED. So like
Wow.
I ordered, I'll never forget this. We ordered algebra courses and I tried to teach myself high school for a year, which is hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't even do algebra when somebody else was teaching me, like,
Right.
when somebody licensed by the state was teaching me.
Yeah. So I tried to teach myself high school for a year. And then I got my GED and I
Wow.
passed my ACT and actually got a pretty good score. Because remember, Amish and Mennonites, they don't do anything from this last century. So the textbooks that they're using in 7th and 8th grade were printed in the 1800s.
Wow.
So, yeah. But, anyways, so then I find myself going to university.
Was that confusing to be like to go from praising the idea of not going to college to being asked what you're studying in college, not if you're going to college? Like, which did you prefer, or which were you most comfortable with?
Well, I mean, when you don't know anything else, you prefer what you've had.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh no,
So
100%.
at the time, I was kind of upset that we were leaving this lifestyle that I was comfortable in and I knew my path. And again, by saying that they were letting us go to university, it wasn't like when I finally wrapped my head around the fact that I could do this and I didn't have to get married. what I wanted to do was I wanted to go to university in DC and study political journalism and write scathing political reviews.
That's
And
cool.
my parents are like, no, you're a woman. You're not fit to be a journalist. You can go to
Wow.
college for education or nursing. Like, those are your two paths.
Wow.
And I have no patience. Like, I don't have any kind of patience. And I knew I could never do education. Like,
Yeah, nursing's probably not great for somebody who has no patience.
probably not. But when my choices are, I'm thinking of like teaching third graders or nursing, I'm like, I'll choose nursing.
Yeah.
But so I find myself enrolled in this university that was just very difficult and very, we'll talk about it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And enrolled in nursing of all things. So yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, for those who maybe aren't familiar, Bob Jones University. What is it?
Oh, well, that depends on who you ask. But
Yeah, in your opinion, in your esteemed opinion.
yeah, so Bob Jones University, here's what will help get you caught up on Bob Jones University. Just Google the I think it was 1981 U.S. Supreme Court case, U.S. versus Bob Jones University.
There's like so much to unpack there.
You could start there.
Yep.
And it was a lawsuit over segregation, because this was the foremost Christian university who was still insisting on segregating. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, can't do that. And so let's start with that.
Yep.
Let's add in a great book, and I'm sure you've read it, is Jesus Christ and John Wayne, or John Wayne and Jesus Christ. Have you read
literally
this?
have it right there on my bookshelf.
Yeah. So like that book talks about this. And yeah, so that's a great place to start. Then there's a great interview on Larry King Live where the third president of the university is talking about how Black and white students should not date, and how they could no longer forbid that, but that was the thing. When I arrived, when I went to school there, and to this day, unless they've changed it in the last 3 years, Sydney, every male dormitory was named after a Ku Klux Klan leader.
And were they open about that, or did they claim it was named after them for a different accomplishment that person had?
Obviously, because they were good Christian Southern men.
Yeah, right. They were esteemed individuals. They were wonderful people. And you had mentioned a couple of things when you reached out to me. The first one I want to ask you about was they had rules on visual intercourse.
Yeah, that got me 50 demerits.
What is that?
So visual intercourse is when you stare in the eyes of the opposite sex, because obviously there was no homosexuality happening, right?
Right.
But when you stare in the eyes of an opposite sex for too long, which too long was anything that a faculty or staff member deemed lustful.
So like even if somebody was like teaching, like a man was teaching, and you like made eye contact with them too long at the front of this room, would that count? Or like who reports on that, or who?
Well, any faculty or staff member was allowed to, like, they literally walked around with these little like demerit sheets, like a little 3x5 cards, and they could write you out demerits for any infraction that they saw. But there was like, I want to fast forward to about 10 years ago. I was 29 years old and I was crossing a street in New Orleans, and there was a man in a suit walking towards me, and I was walking towards him, and we were crossing, and I looked down to avoid eye contact.
Wow.
This is 10 years after I left this university, but it had been
Wow.
so put in my brain that I, as a woman, could not make eye contact with a man.
Wow. And was it mostly, were the demerits mostly given to the women in those situations, or were the demerits ever handed out to the men for like putting a
It
woman
was,
in that situation?
I mean, the time that I got demerits, both me and Jeremy got demerits. So,
Poor
and
Jeremy.
we were definitely doing the visual intercourse, and we were looking at each other with lust for sure.
Wow. And so when you would get a demerit like that, would it always be faculty and staff reporting you and giving those to you, or could somebody else, like a classmate, be like a
No,
whistleblower?
it was always faculty and staff.
Wow.
And it always seemed to be older women that were single over the age of 60, like bitter old women
Interesting.
handing out demerits.
Interesting. Yeah. Weird how that works. And then you also
And it
mentioned,
wasn't one demerit, Sydney. Each infraction was 25 demerits. Let's be clear.
oh,
And you got expelled at 150.
that was going to be my next question. Like, what happened? Wow. So it happened to you twice then, you and poor Jeremy.
Yeah.
Oh, poor Jeremy. um, and so then you talked about the 2 inches of ease rule.
Yeah.
What is that?
So this was specifically for female faculty and staff could walk up to any female student and they could they could grab your clothes, like on the side, I don't know. They could grab your clothes and they had to have an inch on either side or it was considered too tight and form-fitting and you would
So
be
like
given demerits.
like an inch on one side and an inch on the other side of the pinch.
Correct.
Interesting. So it's like not too form fitting.
Correct. So you were just like, we would walk around and these women would walk up to you and grab the sides of your clothes and on your personhood. And it was, yeah, it wasn't great.
Wow. And was that a school similar to, say, some of the Mormon universities where they encourage you to find like a spouse before you're done there? Or was it like strictly prohibited? Don't even try dating there, like wait till you're out of college.
No, they encouraged dating. Like they had a dating parlor where you,
Is this
like,
1930? Did you?
yeah, this is where me and Jeremy got the visual intercourse demerits, just to be clear. Because there was a
Okay.
dating parlor. Where they had like tables and board games and ping pong tables and, you know, couches and stuff. You just couldn't sit close to each other. You couldn't gaze into each other's eyes. So dating was encouraged for sure. And one of the classes that we as women had to take was a class on how to be a godly wife. There wasn't a class for young men on how to be a godly husband.
Of course not. They already know how. They're
But
born knowing how.
there was a 2 or 3 credit class on how to be a godly wife.
Was it similar rules to what you'd learned about being a homemaker as a Mennonite, or was it
It
even
was
further?
it was pretty much verbatim. You know,
Wow.
like the man is the leader of the home. The man is to be respected and revered. You as a wife, your job is to clean the house and bear children and raise children and keep the children clean and keep them happy and keep them quiet for when the husband comes home and have dinner and laundry and be submissive and
It's
all the things.
interesting because most of the cultures that teach those things and believe those things do their best to like keep women out of school. So it's interesting that they encouraged you to go to school, but it sounds like they encouraged you to go to school so you could study better on like how to be a better wife and how to be a better like Christian woman. So it's an interesting dichotomy because I feel like in every other culture where that's the focus, like being a homemaker, raising the children, you're discouraged from getting an education. But it sounds like their version of an education was just out of convenience for them so that you behave and you raise children the way that they want those children to be.
And also so you can meet other fundamentalist boys and get married, you
Get
know?
that MRS degree. Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. So did you enjoy your time there? Or was it pretty stressful the whole time? Was it a mix?
It was definitely a mix. There was definitely parts that I enjoyed. There was a lot that was horrific, you know? I did end up getting expelled at some point, and we got expelled. There was 4 of us that got expelled.
How'd that
And
happen?
uh, well, we went to Pizza Hut.
What a slut.
I
So literally that's it. You went to Pizza Hut?
We went to Pizza Hut in a mixed group without a chaperone.
Yep. There it
Somebody
is.
turned us in, and the other 3 lied about it. And if I had just lied, we would all be fine. But I really believe that if I explained the truth, like There was 4 of us. There was no sex, there was no rock and roll, there was no alcohol, there was no smoking. We just literally
Wow.
were craving Pizza Hut pizza, and we decided to go. I
Did you know at the time when you went that that could have been like an expelling or an expulsatory, I don't know the word, that could have got you kicked out?
Oh, I did. I didn't realize that somebody would tell on us.
Wow.
And we still don't know who to this day who snitched or not. Yeah, somebody at Pizza Hut definitely told on us.
So you think somebody at Pizza Hut did? You
Oh
don't think
yeah.
it was like, wow, that's so weird. You'd think that they would want your business. That's that's
Well, I mean the city of Greenville, like there's definitely they are way more willing. Like I had people in my dormitory that they went to a bar, and the bar called the school and said, "We have your students down here. Come get them."
wow.
Like you see, I'm saying like
Yeah.
the city is real. I mean, think about it. You have all this self righteousness
Yeah.
and all of this, just let's call a spade. All this racism, homophobia, and self righteousness
Yep.
in this city, and the city is more than willing to turn those students in.
Right. And I guess when most of the people in that city also went to Bob Jones University, they probably still believe the same, I wasn't allowed to do that when I was that age, so you shouldn't either. The rules to still apply to you.
Yeah.
Wow. And so what happened after you got expelled? Like, what were your thoughts? What did your family say? Where'd you go
Oof.
from there?
Well, um, my mother was going through menopause at the same time, so that wasn't great.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of tears. There was a lot of, I'm going to have a heart attack. I was put in mandatory weekly counseling, and I was so frustrated because I
Yeah.
was like, I don't know how much more repentance I can do over this fucking pepperoni pizza.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I did not do anything that was actual sin. And the pastor would be like, except you have a hardened heart. You left without a chaperone. You're not recognizing that was wrong. And I was like, I'm not saying that I recognize it was against the rules, but it's not sin.
Right.
And so like this weekly counseling over this was just terrible.
And it was religious counseling. It wasn't like
Oh
actual
yeah.
counseling.
It was
Yeah.
with the fundamentalist Bob Jones University pastor that we had gone to after we left the Mennonites. So it was just, and I was, to be clear, Sydney, at this point, I was 22 years old.
Right.
So they wouldn't release transcripts or anything because I was an expelled student. So I didn't feel like I had a choice but to go back. So I go back and I'm put on spiritual probation the first
Jeez
semester,
Louise. Spiritual probation?
which means I had to have weekly counseling with my dorm counselor over this goddamn pepperoni pizza
And it's
from
not even that
10
great. It's
months
Pizza
ago.
Hut. Yeah.
Pizza Hut, right?
It's not even
And
like Gino's East. It's not even like anything
right, it's not
delish.
Illuminati special. Like, yeah.
No, it's not Uno Chicago. Wow.
So one day we're in one of these just painful mandatory counseling things, and I said, and I'm going to give like what's it called, a PSA right now.
Like a
I'm
trigger
getting ready
warning.
to talk about like some sexual assault, so fair warning for that. But we were in one of these weekly counseling over this Pizza Hut debacle, and I told her, I said, if you really want to help me, because this is not bothering me, like that is not bothering me, but if you really want to help me, can we talk about what is? And I thought, in my mind, I thought she was a dorm counselor, so she had, what's it called, confidentiality.
Yeah.
And so I revealed to her, she was the first person I revealed to, that I had been sexually assaulted
Wow.
3 weeks before my freshman year of school. And I thought that she would help me with it,
Yeah.
And the next day, she comes to my dorm room and she's like, you and I have a meeting with the dean of students. And I said,
Wow.
what do you mean? And she's like, well, I just don't feel qualified, so I have looped him in and he wants to meet with you. And now I went from never telling anybody about this most like painful, shameful thing, right?
Yeah.
To now I have to tell it again to this man who's the dean
Yeah.
of students. So I went with her up to the administrative building to talk to this guy. His name is Jim Berg. And I told him what happened. Told him I was 19. I was at work. I was working a shift. It was my partner. I told him what happened. And when I was done, the first thing he said to me, Sydney, was, "Were you drinking?" And I can remember sitting on this couch and I was like, "No, I was at work."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Were you smoking pot?" And I was like, I've never done that.
No.
And he's like, "Were you engaged in sexual immorality with this man or any other man?" And I was like, "No." And he kept asking all these questions and he was trying to find the reason this. And he said that this is verbatim, Sydney. He goes, "There was a sin in your life that caused this sexual assault to happen."
What?
And I just ran. Sydney, I don't know if I
Yeah.
said anything, but I ran. I ran out of that administrative building.
Yeah.
And I never went back at the end of that semester.
Good.
That was the
That's
end. That was the end of it for me, for Bob Jones University.
yeah.
So did I have some good times? Sure. Was it terribly traumatizing and horrible? And I do not recommend it. Absolutely.
He literally was like, "Look, something you did made this happen. So just admit what it was you did."
He said there's a sin in your life
Yeah.
that causes sexual assault to happen.
Wow. So at this point, at your current point in life, do you consider yourself a religious person anymore, or was that the end of it that day as well? What are your thoughts in terms of how you feel now?
I mean, how do I feel now?
Spiritual, perhaps?
Spiritual for sure. I pretty much hate religion.
Yeah.
I like to say I hate religion, but I still love Jesus, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Yep.
And like there's a lot of deconstructing,
Yes.
a lot. I read a lot of Father Richard Rohr, who's a priest. I read a lot of different people's stuff. I go to a church here on the island. It's reformed Dutch Reformed church. And
Mhm.
I asked the pastor, "What the hell is a Dutch Reformed church?" And he's like, "Well, we broke away from the regular Reformed church on two issues. One of them is we affirm LGBTQ, and the
Good.
other is we affirm women as equal children of God."
Right. Absolutely.
And I was like, "Oh."
Yeah.
And this is the first church I've ever been in. And I've been in church my whole life. Like Sydney, I'm going to turn 40 years old this year.
Really?
I have not ever not been in church. But this is the first church I've ever been at where my entire person is welcome and I'm not less than.
No. Absolutely not. And
So
for
yeah,
anybody listening, the gentleman who implied that there's something that must have been done in order to deserve what happened was absolutely wrong. So anybody listening who's ever been in a situation like that or has been told something like that or is afraid that they are the reason something like that happened, there is literally no such thing as something you can do to deserve that sort of thing happening to you. And I know that there's a lot of people who think like, well, my situation isn't as bad as yes, it is. Yes, it is. Like, just because other things have happened to other people doesn't mean that your situation is less bad or less important or you're less deserving of, help or support or anything like that. So I just wanted to clarify, like, that guy was absolutely wrong. And it
oh,
sounds like you're part of a group now that would have the complete opposite reaction of that would actually support you.
oh yes, for sure. And like again, if you start Googling Bob Jones University, you're gonna find that in 2013, 14, there was it's called a GRACE investigation into sex abuse,
Good.
and specifically Jim Berg's handling of abuse.
Good.
And I
Good.
participated in that investigation, and
Awesome.
like I received an apology letter.
Wonderful.
But for what that was worth.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm sure it was heartfelt, for sure.
Yeah.
That's wild. And so you leave for the last time, and then where do you go from there? What decisions do you make after that?
Bad ones. No, like I get married to this boy, and like he was a guy that I had known from the Amish and Mennonite, and I thought, oh, we have a similar background, so that's enough to make marriage work. It's not.
Yeah.
Like,
Was he still pretty devoutly religious, or had he left the church as well?
he had left the church, but
Yeah.
we were just very like
codependent almost.
well, just codependent, and just if this will help kind of put it in perspective. We were married for 2 years, and I was divorced before I found out what my clitoris was.
Oh boy. That
There's
sounds
that.
like a long 2 years. Sounds like a real long 2 years.
Right.
I am so sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, I found it now. Like,
Yeah, I hope he found it
good.
with somebody too. Yeah, for sure. That's wild. And so, what made you realize you needed a divorce? Was it mutual? Was it you? Was it him? Like, who first kind of brought that up?
It was he wasn't a good guy. Like, he was the non-working type. He was the cheating type. He was what I call perfect first husband material. That first husband material, the guy that you marry because they're cute, and you think you have same trauma bonds, and then you realize, oh, this dude needs to work on himself and get a job and keep his penis mostly in his pants. Yeah, he's first husband material.
He needs to work and work on himself. Like, there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done. Wow. And so, did either of you get a lot of backlash for getting divorced, or were you pretty separated from your previous group at that point?
Oh, let's talk about that. So remember, he had left too. His mother was still in the Amish and Mennonite world, the plain people. So for years after my divorce, Sydney, I don't know how these people, they don't have Facebook. They just talk a lot. Somehow they would find out that I was dating someone, and they would send the bishop's wife to visit me. You ever had a knock on your door on a Thursday to see a group of Amish and bishop wives come and just lecture you on your dating?
Your chastity?
Yes. Because his mother believed that even though we were divorced, that was ungodly and unchristian, and we should still we should get remarried. And just to be clear, he had remarried.
Oh,
son was married to someone else and living in Arkansas, and I'm getting visits from her bishop's wife because I'm somebody named Dan.
Wow. And I know in some religions, for example, I believe, don't quote me on this, it's not Latter-day Saints. I spoke to somebody recently who, when you're married to somebody, they believe you're married for eternity. Like, even if you get divorced and remarried in heaven, that person, that first spouse, is still your spouse. Is that similar, or are they just?
Please.
Yeah, you're like, oh God.
I don't know about that.
That's wild. And so they, like, even though he was remarried, they thought that you should still get remarried to him. Like, they would rather him divorce his current wife.
Or just simply stay chaste and single for the rest of my life.
Become a nun.
Mm-hmm. No, I discovered my clitoris at this point. I was not staying chaste.
No, you're like, listen, sisters, there's this thing I got to tell you about. You don't know about it, but I'm going to teach you. Wow. And so where were you living at this point? Like, where was all this happening?
At this point, I was living in Tennessee because he was from Tennessee, and I had started working for Wyndham, and that was my first corporate sales job. And eventually I wanted to move closer to my Louisiana roots. And so at the age of 29, I loaded up my car and moved to Louisiana, to New Orleans to be exact.
Nice.
So whatever whatever naiveness that was still inside of me from the Amish and Mennonites, New Orleans cured it, and then
That's
some.
what, wow. Like to go from being a Mennonite to living in like what a lot of religious people think is like the most debauched, like soulless, like God-forsaken city in
Yeah.
America. That's wild. And
So,
did you go through like a wild streak or had you kind of sowed your oats at that point? Like what was life like for you at that point?
no, I had definitely not sowed my oats yet. So I moved there in, I guess, August, end of July, beginning of August of 2013. And it was so funny because, well, I got lost. I got lost the first day I got there, but I saw a coffee shop that said
You got
Fundie.
lost before you even got there, honey.
Yeah,
You were lost.
I know. And I pulled into this coffee shop and I was talking to this barista, Joe, and I was like, yeah, I just moved here. I don't have an apartment yet, but I'm looking and I'm lost. And he's like, go up 2 blocks, knock on the gray house with the white pillars and ask for Bill. And so I did. And to this day, I'm like, I should not have done that. Like, go knock on a door and ask for Bill. So I asked for Bill, and sure enough, he had an apartment, and it was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and it already had 2 roommates. And he's like, you'd be sharing the apartment with Ratish, who's from Dubai, and he's in the music industry, and he's never home. And Killian. And he's like, I need to tell you, Killian is transgendered. Are you okay with that? Sydney, I did not know what transgendered was.
I was gonna say, like, welcome to a new terminology for you.
So I Googled it. And I said, hold on, let me get my iPhone out. So I Googled this. And I said, I didn't understand it. I was like, is he a cross-dresser? Like, what does this mean? And the bill was like, no, 5 years ago when he rented from me, his name was Kelly and he was a blonde-haired woman. And today his name is Killian and he's a redheaded man. And I was like, okay. And I said, I guess if he's respectful, I respect him. I don't know. I don't know. I guess fine. So that's how I moved into my first apartment with this music guy from Dubai and this transgendered young man.
If the Mennonites could see you now, they'd
Right.
they'd keel over and die.
And Ratish was hardly ever there, so I didn't meet him for like 2 months. But Killian was fantastic, and he was so considerate. Like, this is the most considerate man I've ever met. And he was always like, oh, I'm the man, let me grab that. Or I'm the man, I'll carry the heavy stuff. Let me get on the ladder and change like
That's
the smoke
great.
alarm. He was really, really cool. And about 2 months later, Ratish eventually comes back from wherever he had been. And I wake up in the middle of the night, Sydney, and there's this smell. Terrible smell. And there was a haziness in the whole apartment. And I go check the dryer and I check the stove. And finally, I call Bill and I said, Bill, I think something's on fire. I just can't find it. And Bill's like, okay, call 911 and I'll come over.
Oh, no.
So I call 911, but 911 never works fast in New Orleans. Don't even call him. But anyways, he beats them there. He gets there first and he walks in the kitchen door and he goes, this isn't a fire, Kate. This is a bomb.
I was gonna say, I bet it was weed.
I've never smelled it before. I didn't know.
That's funny. Oh, that's funny.
So he was able to persuade the fire department that there's no fire. And he talked to Ratish and he was like, I don't care what drugs you do. But he's like, I do believe in the energy of the house. And you upset the energy of the house. So you have to tell Katie if you're going to have like bong parties.
Like, listen, Katie, she used to be Mennonite. You got to tell her if you're going to smoke weed. She doesn't know.
Yeah.
She thinks the building's burning down. Just give the girl a heads up.
Yeah. But like that was, and it was just, and then on my 3rd day in New Orleans, I was hot. It was August. And I Googled swimming pools. And you know how your iPhone brings them up closest to you? And it said country club swimming pool, 0.3 miles away, like less than half a mile.
Yeah.
And being from Tennessee, I was and working in the hospitality sales, I was like, I love country clubs. So I get my swimsuit and my cover up and my flip-flops and I go down to this country club. it does not mean the same thing in New Orleans as it means everywhere else.
Uh-oh.
So they card me and they put a wristband on me for alcohol, I assume. And I go to the back where the pool's at. And there's this guy and he's naked. And I was like, oh, okay, well, not a big deal. I've seen penises before, you know. And so I go tell the bartender, you know, I ordered my drinks, and I told him, I said, look, there's a naked guy over there, just for you to know. And the bartender just gives me this look. And so I go get in the pool, and the bartender comes by, and I was like, again, it's not a big deal, but there's like 12 naked people here, all guys. And the bartender's like, this is a clothing optional pool. And I was like,
oh,
so
wow.
yeah, that was on my third day in New Orleans. But
So did you ever smoke weed with your roommate?
I did not smoke weed with my roommate. To this day, Sydney, I cannot figure out how to inhale.
Oh, really?
I cannot figure out how to smoke weed.
That's funny. Well, you can eat it now too, though. You can get some pretty good gummies. Yeah.
So I do the edibles.
There you go.
I'm headed back to New Orleans for Mardi Gras in 2 weeks. And when I was negotiating my Airbnb price, I was like, it's a little higher than I wanted to pay, but if you'll throw in some edibles and mushrooms, I'll take it. And they're like, sure.
Wow. That sounds like a wonderful time. I got to use Airbnb, man. I didn't know that's part of the deal.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Airbnbs in New Orleans come with your drugs of your choice.
That's amazing. I'm writing this down. Mom, don't listen to this. That's so. How have you been since? Do you still, for example, I grew up Baptist, and sometimes I'll talk to other people who deconstructed from being Baptist, and we talk about how, like, even though we are completely comfortable in our non-beliefs now, you know, we're completely out of that. There's still like that micro voice in the back of your head that's like, but what if that is true? Like, what if everything you're doing is like a sin or whatever, you know, what if like at the end of the day, all of that was real and you stopped following the rules, you know, 20 years ago. How do you feel now? Like, do you find that there's any lasting impact, or is there anything like positive about the experience you've kept with you? I don't know, like how has life been since you deconstructed?
Life has been really good, you know, like
You're like glowing. You've got like an island glow.
well, I have an island lover that I need to get back to soon, but
Ooh.
yes. No, like deconstructing has been hard, but it's been fantastic because at the end of the day, I still love God, and I'm gonna let him sort out all his fucked up people. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, 100%.
and I was you know, I do a lot of things alone, and the bad thing about me is when I'm alone at a restaurant, I will listen in on other people's conversations and sometimes engage, which is always uncomfortable for them. But
That's wonderful.
the couple of years ago, I was listening in on this conversation with these two guys, and one of them was, I think, gay, and his friend was talking to him about his dad, and he's like, I can't believe you still try to have a relationship with your dad after the way he treated you when you came out and all this stuff. And then I heard the young gay man say this, and I've never forgotten it, Sydney. I love my dad for who he is, and I forgive him for who he isn't.
Wow.
And while I've been deconstructing, that is something I've had to hold on to because my parents are still in that fundamentalism.
That was my next question. I wasn't sure if you were still in touch with them or what that was like.
Oh yeah, I'm still in touch, but it's been I have to remind myself I love them for who they are and I forgive them for who they're not.
Wow, that's such a powerful statement.
And I still have brothers and sisters who, like, some of them try to be more supportive than others, but like I had a brother and sister-in-law be like, there's basically no difference between pedophiles and people who have sex outside of marriage. Like, they're both, and I'm like, what?
That's ridiculous.
And I have to keep reminding myself I love them for who they are and I forgive them for who they aren't.
Right.
And it's, but the deconstructing, that's my work.
Right.
It's my life. It's my faith journey.
Right. Absolutely.
And so I read a lot. I read as many different voices as possible, because the God that I came to love as a child cannot be contained by one voice. It can't be contained by one. And I'm like, the book I'm currently reading, it's such a good book. It's called by Dr. Christina Cleveland, and it's called God is a Black Woman.
I saw that on your Facebook. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, and it's so good. It's so good. And I love her opening line, what is the image of God? Who is that? What is it? In my earlier life, I was taught that it was white, it was male, and it was a faraway God, a God separate from me, a God up there. In my deconstructing process, I've come to see God as equally female. I like to say that God was the first non-binary person.
Yeah.
And which really, really angers my fundamentalism family.
Oh, yeah.
I've come to see God as non-binary and also female and male, like feminine and male. I see God not as white anymore. I see God not even as this divine, angry one. I see him as father and mother, and the best way, when somebody asks me why I moved to New Orleans, this is what I explained to them. Because I moved to New Orleans when I was beginning to work on the trauma and seek help from the sexual assault from the years of past. And I felt so broken. And I told the person that asked me why I would ever move to New Orleans, I said, when you're in New Orleans, it's okay to be broken and beautiful at the same time. There's no expectation that you're perfect, that everything's going right, that everything is sunny in Philadelphia. All these other places I could live at, there's a certain expectation that when you walk out in the street, that you're all put together. And New Orleans does not have that expectation of you.
Yeah.
And I see kind of God like that.
Yeah.
That God is messy, and it is okay for me to be angry with God. It is okay for me to have questions for God. It is okay for me to have too many limoncellos and sit in a corner and say, what the fuck? That's okay.
Yeah.
And so God and I we have really great conversations. And yeah.
That's awesome. My favorite thing about like that last 5-minute soundbite there from you is like how at peace you sound. You sound just like so at peace and relaxed and sure of yourself. And I think that's like all that anybody could ever hope for is that sense of like just you're like the human embodiment of like a sigh of relief. And it sounds like you've really learned how to just kind of let go and move on, which I think a lot of people in pain struggle to do, or they're not sure how to even start on that aspect. If you had to give any piece of advice for somebody who's deconstructing, or maybe they've been through trauma, they've been told things similar to what you were told about their behaviors and experiences, and they're looking for that same sense of peace, what would you say?
Um, like, oh, I would say you're okay. Wherever you're at right now, it's okay. I would say to them, like, share it. What's really helped me a lot is I don't filter out. I don't filter out my trauma. I don't filter out the bad. I share all of it so that it has no power over me. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. 100%.
Like, I've done a lot of reading with Brene Brown, and she's taught me about that shame requires secrecy and silence. So whatever is going on, I just bring it to light. I would tell that person, don't stop. I would tell that person, there's a big, wonderful life out there. And don't let the bitterness stop you from living it.
Yeah.
I would tell that person to get in therapy. I would
Real
tell
therapy.
yeah, real therapy, not Christian therapy. I would tell that person to maybe try hypnosis. Hypnosis helped me a ton. Yeah.
And go to New Orleans and do some shrooms.
There we go.
Listen, I'm going to look into that. Not that I might edit that part out of me saying that, but I'm going to look into that because that sounds just like what I need. Sounds like the exact weekend I need.
No, Sydney, I'll be there the 14th through the 19th. Come on through.
Don't tempt me with a good time. Well, Katie, thank you so much for sharing your story and your experiences and your wisdom with the podcast. It's wonderful to see you again. I love that you are just living your best life. You're glowing, you're living on an island, you're traveling. Like, I'm just so happy for you. And I think the best part about you as a person, just your general existence, is you are living proof that it gets better and it can be better. Just because things are hard, just because you feel totally traumatized or hurt or rejected or lost, like Katie Landry is proof that even the people who are in so much pain right now can live their best island life if they go, looking for it.
And I'm telling you, City, that part right there, like, if you had told me at different points in my life that I could be happy again, that I could find not just happy, joy.
Yeah.
That I could feel comfortable in my skin and in my, like, femaleness, I would never have believed you. Because everything from my family of origin to the religion I was raised at, to the experiences and the traumas I had told me otherwise. And there was a couple moments where I almost gave up. And if I had, there's so much I would have missed out of.
Absolutely.
And you just got to keep going. And you got to trust that if you keep going and you keep trying, not even trying, if you just keep going and moving forward, there will be better.
Absolutely. It's only up from there. Yeah. If you allow that, if you don't give up. But, well, Katie, thank you so much. It was so great to see you. I'm so happy to see that you're thriving. And anybody listening, I hope you heed her words and recognize that there is life after, even if you're totally lost, even if you don't know where to go from here. I hope that you see my friend Katie here as an example that, like, things can get better. Things can get better no matter what somebody says, no matter what they're saying about you, no matter what you've been told to believe. It can get better, and to seek it, to welcome it. Thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Miss Sydney. All right, talk to you later.
Talk to you later.